Adaptation is a tricky thing. Anytime you're taking a work and translating it from one medium to another medium, there are going to be things that are lost in translation. No translation is perfect. No adaptation is going to be exactly one for one recapturing the magic of whatever the original was, as different mediums have different strengths and different weaknesses. Game of Thrones is often cited as a bad adaptation, which I agree with for the later seasons, as they're lacking in a lot of source material, as the books are not out yet, and they made certain cuts that very much ended up hindering the story in the long run. However, if we take a look at House of the Dragon, such a thing hasn't really been dictated yet. We're only on the first season, and the actual adaptation of this work is something that is very much contested, I've seen in online spaces, particularly Twitter, where seemingly everything is contested about everything. So today we're going to take a look at House of the Dragon and at its source material, Fire and Blood, and compare and contrast the two, as there are some very interesting insights to be gained from doing so. Most of the assessment of adaptation that I've seen online is just determining whether or not something is accurate to the original, whether or not, in this case, the show is accurate to the book, or in the case of like movies or similar things. I'm going to be doing the opposite today because if you don't know, Fire and Blood, the book that House of the Dragon is based on, is really weird. It's not a novel like the main Game of Thrones books, but rather it is an in universe history text, similar to the World of Ice and Fire book that was released a few years prior to Fire and Blood. It has numerous accountings of events for the first 133 years of Targaryen rule, and throughout that time, we get a lot of variation between these individual little events. And because of that, it's not a perfect document. It was written by someone in universe, and it is very much flawed and missing information in places. And it's quite interesting to assess it for that reason. We're not going to be checking how accurate House of the Dragon is to Fire and Blood. We're going to be checking how accurate Fire and Blood is to House of the Dragon. Or rather, we are going to be assessing this story as though House of the Dragon is an unbiased interpretation of what happens in the Dance of the Dragons, and we are seeing what each source gets correct from the story of the first 10 episodes so far. That being said, there are some things that are very clearly just changes for the show, and I'll address those on a case by case basis as they come up. But overall, I thought this would be an interesting experiment to undergo. For the Dance of the Dragons, we have three concrete sources that we get information from throughout the entire conflict and its prelude. All three of them are quite interesting and have a wide variety of circumstances and ways they're observing these events. Firstly, we have Eustace. He's a Septon, he is very involved with the faith in King's Landing, and he acts as a royal confessor both for Viserys and for Aegon II, so he has a very direct point of view on things that are happening in King's Landing throughout both the time before this conflict and after. He has a book called The Reign of King Viserys, first of his name, and The Dance of the Dragons that came after. And that is the text from which most of his information comes from in the story. To balance Eustace, we have the testimony of Mushroom, who is my favorite source by a pretty wide margin. Mushroom is a dwarf and a jester in the court of Rhaenyra Targaryen, so he tends to be fairly biased in her favor, or at least in favor of her side in the conflict, and his accounts tend to be very outlandish and wild. Everyone is backstabbing and sleeping with everyone else. It's pretty crazy, and it's a really interesting kind of chain of events that he lies out throughout this entire sequence of the Dance of the Dragons. The final source is less concrete than the previous two, as it's a series of maesters who are taking down accounts of the events. The book Fire and Blood is written by a maester, so they are given a bit more weight than the other two at most times, at least in terms of determining what events are true and are not. So a number of different maesters are taking up this mantle, and I'll mention specific maesters as we get to them. But overall, it is the constant battle, tug, pull, everything between these three sources throughout the Dance of the Dragons. Before we get into assessing individual events from the Dance of the Dragons, it's important to go over how I'm going to be assessing each source. Firstly, we are going to be giving each source points, because I'm a teacher and who doesn't love points? So we're going to be grading them on a scale of 0 to 3. In order for an event to be something that is worth giving a grade to, we need to have diverging stories from at least two of the sources. If it just says, oh, Mushroom said this and nothing else, Mushroom doesn't get any points for that. It has to be something where he is in conflict with at least one other source. What's more, these points will be associated based on how accurate the events that they describe are to the events that we see in House of the Dragon. So if something didn't happen at all the way a source says it is, that is 0 points. If they are right on the money, spot on, it is a 3 out of 3. Threes are pretty rare in here, I've found, as I've been assessing them, but overall it is a pretty balanced scale, and we'll go through at the end and assess who is the most accurate. The first event for which our sources diverge comes from Episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. Daemon's banishment and escapades in King's Landing with Rhaenyra are a main point of contention between all three of our sources, and they all have different kind of elements of it, correct or incorrect. Firstly, our main man Mushroom comes in with a big 2 points. He calls that Daemon took Rhaenyra to a brothel, and then asks Viserys to wed her to him, as who else would marry her after this? However, he doesn't get the full 3 points because he says it's more of an ongoing thing rather than this one crazy night. Eustace gets 0 points because Daemon and Rhaenyra were not discovered abed together. They went to the brothel and were seen there, but they were not able to turn into a bed. The Maester perspective gets 1 point because they have no details but are technically correct in saying that Daemon and Viserys quarreled and Daemon was exiled. So overall, pretty interesting round across the board as we have a good mix of point distribution. The next event comes from the subsequent episode and involves the embitterment of one Kristen Cole. Mushroom, unfortunately, earns 0 points for this one. He states that Cole resents Rhaenyra because she attempted to seduce him, but he stood steadfast in his vows of the King's Guard and did not get seduced by Rhaenyra. However, on the other hand, Eustace comes in with a big 3 points, as it's quite accurate to what happened in the show, pretty much beat for beat. He is successfully seduced by Rhaenyra and then offers to run away to Essos with her, and he is subsequently rejected. So this leads to him becoming bitter and becoming one of her most steadfast enemies in the near future. This is also the first event where we only have 2 sources. There's no Maester account given, so they do not get any points for this one, leaving Eustace in the lead for now. Next up, we have Rhaenyra's marriage, and the sources on this span both episode 5 and episode 6, and throughout that time skip period. Mushroom earns another 2 points, stating that Laenor did have a relationship with Carl Corey, and Rhaenyra did have this relationship with Harren that might have produced her children. That's pretty accurate overall, though it's not very detailed and does have some inaccuracies, which again costs Mushroom the 3rd point. He has a tendency to elaborate too much, and from those elaborations stems inaccuracy, so unfortunate for our good pal Mushroom. Eustace gets 1 point as he says they had a very distant marriage, but doesn't elaborate on that. That seems to be true, at least in the romantic sense, based on the conversations we see between them, so I'm going to give him a point for that. Additionally, there was no account given by the Maesters again, so they are stuck at 0 points, unfortunately. The case of Rhaenyra's bastard children is pretty cut and dry with these sources. Mushroom gets 2 points as he outright says that they're bastards. Eustace gets 0 as he dismisses the rumors out of hand, which is actually quite interesting because Eustace tends to be pretty in favor of the Greens, yet he does say that all of Rhaenyra's children are legitimate, which was a big Green grievance, if I could say that. That took me several takes. Additionally, the Maester account hints at it, but doesn't really say anything either way, so I'm going to give them 1 point because they did do better than Eustace, and they are hurting for points for not being in the last 2 rounds. Laenor's Death is our next big event from episode 7, and we have a rarity where Mushroom is silent. No account given from him, so no points. Eustace gets 1 point as he does hint towards Carl Corey's involvement, but it really isn't a jealousy motive as Eustace says it is. It just seems to be more of a conspiracy between him and Daemon. That conspiracy, however, is somewhat pointed out in the Maester perspective, which I was surprised at on my reread of Fire and Blood for this video. They hint essentially that there is some larger scheme involved in Laenor's death, ending with an escape of some sort. The escape in the book seems to point towards just Carl escaping, but it could very well be reverse engineered to say that maybe Laenor escaped, which in the books I don't think is the case, but they did very much take that as what happened in the show. Also, I apologize if you heard that. Harry is running around like a crazy person, and I need to go play with him, so 1 second. I'm back. My cat Harry says hello. Sorry about that. The next one jumps back in time a little bit to the Strong's demise, so the death of Harwin and Lionel Strong. Mushroom, 0 points. He blames the sea snake. Eustace, 0 points. He blames Daemon. Maesters, 0 points. They blame Viserys, which I thought was quite interesting. So yeah, none of them called that it was Larry who did this. They all thought it was different people, which honestly kind of fair. I didn't take Larry for a double kinslayer at this point early in the story, but we're all wrong sometimes, except for me. Rhaenyra and Daemon's marriage is another interesting one. Jumping back to episode 7, Mushroom states that Rhaenyra was pregnant before they wed. I'm going to give him 1 point. There's no proof that she was pregnant, as the only time they were together was immediately before they got married, but he does have the fact that they were together before they got married, and that's an accuracy, and I'm going to give this one to Mushroom, mostly because I like him. Eustace also gets 1 point, as they likely did want to keep it from Viserys, but there's no direct evidence for this being their core motivation for wedding in secret, as they very much seem to do it in front of their kids and really do it for themselves rather than fear of Viserys in the show. No account given by the Maesters, so once again, no points for them. The Green Council has 2 points at which the sources diverge, and both of them are quite interesting. I'm giving 1 point to both Mushroom and Eustace, as both of them state that Beesbury is the one who's defending Rhaenyra's claim and attempting to uphold the honor of Viserys' succession. However, the Maester perspective is actually quite interesting. Maester Orwyle is actually the only source who is in the room for the Green Council, and yet his testimony seems to be far and away the most inaccurate out of anyone here, mostly because he's trying to make himself look better, and it's really interesting to read. He seems to be taking all of these quotes that Beesbury said and saying that Orwyle himself is the one who said them in an attempt to make him look better and try to be the kind of good part of this treasonous council. So it's an interesting kind of act in perspective, and that's kind of why I love Fire and Blood, and not just as a history nerd, but just to look at the different perspectives and how people try to kind of twist these accounts to make themselves look better. Speaking of trying to make the Green Council as a whole look better, we arrive at Lord Beesbury's demise, which I think is a big point of contention. Going into House of the Dragon, I was quite interested to see which of these the show would go with, and they ended up choosing pretty much none of them. First up, continuing his streak from last round, Maester Orwyle is kind of lying about this pretty overtly in order to try to save face. He says that Beesbury is imprisoned, he's confined to one of the black cells, catches a chill, and dies there. So it's accidental. Nobody in the Green Council's a murderer. It's all happy sunshine and rainbows. Mushroom, I'm giving 1 point, as he says that Cole pushed Beesbury out a window onto spikes below. That is obviously incorrect, but he is still better than the Maester perspective, as he does have someone, specifically Kristen Cole, murdering Lord Beesbury. Eustace, however, comes in with 2 points. He says that Kristen forced Beesbury to his seat and killed him with a dagger by slitting his throat. As we know, this isn't accurate to the show, but I do think that the council balls are something that wasn't really considered in the book, and the whole forcing him to his chair and then killing him, like hands on, is very accurate to what happened in the show. That's why Eustace is getting 2 points, but not 3 points. The final occurrence from the show that we're going to be judging the books for is the death of Prince Luke and his dragon Arax from episode 10. Mushroom says something that I love, but I'm also giving him 0 points for. Luke's corpse washed up on the shore, and Aemon cut out his eyes and presented them to one of the Baratheon girls. I love it. It's incredibly anime and suits Aemon super well, but just based on the mechanics of everything and where we saw Luke's body end up as of episode 10, which seems to be inside of Vagar's tummy, I don't think that this one is physically possible, though none of us are experts on the digestive system of dragons, so who's to say? Eustace has no account and thus no points, but the Maesters I'm given 3 points because they state that the prince died with his dragon, and their description of the actual battle there and the events as they unfolded was very accurate to what happened on the show. This is very good, and the Maesters have their first perfect score on the board, so good for them. We will now take some time and tally up the points and figure out whose accounting is the most accurate of these three sources. Who do you think will win? Who do you want to win? Vote now on your devices or in the comments below. And while you're down there, leave a like and subscribe because I really appreciate it and helps me grow the channel. Yeah, let's get into who exactly won this kind of retelling of the Dance of the Dragons in terms of accuracy. In last place, surprising probably no one, is the Maester account with 7 points. They lose out a lot because they don't have exact sources on a couple things, and the things that they do have exact sources on, they tend to be pretty vague and not really give enough details to really be given enough points in perfect scores and whatnot. They scored 7 points, which is perfectly respectable. These are a lot closer margins than I expected overall when I was making this video, so it is interesting to see exactly how accurate these sources are on my undoubtedly very, very imperfect grading scale. If you notice this through calculating on your own, you might already know that we actually have a tie for first place. Both Eustace and Mushroom have 9 points for all of these events, all told, and it is quite interesting to see the very contrasting perspectives between these two, ending up in exactly the same point total in this scale. However, I do want to have a single winner, and I'm going to have effectively a Mario Party bonus star here going to Mushroom, given the fact that a lot of his accounts were quite accurate, but ended up getting knocked down for details and embellishments that I'm sure he added just for being a jester. So, based on that, I do think that given that he is a jester and has these kind of just joke embellishments all over the place that maybe shouldn't be counted against him, Mushroom does seem like, as of the first season of House of the Dragon, the most accurate account of the Dance of the Dragons. Overall, I think that's quite interesting. It says a lot about the kind of view of the world and the way that kind of gestures tend to get overlooked, as I talked about in a previous video. It's a breath of fresh air assessing House of the Dragon as an adaptation, at least as compared to Game of Thrones. Back then, it was just, oh, this is different from the book, and that makes it worse because these books are great. In this case, Fire and Blood is a very interesting source text, but it is also pretty flawed. The story's not the most satisfying, and like I said at the top, it is a history text. It's not a narrative. It's not as satisfying to read as any George R. R. Martin novel would be. I'm a history nerd and a social studies teacher, so I love it, but I know that it's very much not the most loved by everyone. Overall, I think the first season has done a great job of adapting the source material in an interesting and narrative driven way that is both unique from its original material and makes sense as just a story. And I'm really happy for that. Summer 2024 cannot come fast enough, and I am super excited to assess more of this in the future. You guys will have to let me know closer to that time if you guys want me to do this for future seasons of this show, because I just had this idea and was excited to do it. So, this has been the video on the accuracy of House of the Dragon. What do you think? Do you like the show, dislike the show? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to leave a like and subscribe as well. It helps me grow the channel and just generally makes me feel good. And I'll have more videos for you in the near future. It's a ton of fun making these, and I've got a lot more ideas for the near future. So, yeah, thank you all for watching, and I hope you all have a great rest of your week. I will talk to you all soon.